What happens when a man who has everything decides he wants more? David Sterling, a billionaire titan of industry, walked into his divorce hearing with a predator's smile. On his arm wasn't his wife of 15 years, the mother of his children, but his stunning young mistress, June. He thought he had the perfect plan to leave his wife, Eleanor, with nothing, not even her dignity. He was about to publicly accuse her of infidelity and demand a paternity test for their 2 children. But in the cold, quiet halls of justice, a secret was waiting. A secret locked in an envelope on the judge's desk. David came expecting a victory. But he was walking into a perfectly laid trap, and the truth encoded in DNA was about to detonate his entire world. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Mateo County Superior Court was thick with the scent of old paper and simmering animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all polished wood and muted beige walls designed to leach the passion out of human conflict. But today it failed spectacularly. The room buzzed with a palpable energy, a cocktail of anticipation and schadenfreude that clung to the tailored suits of the lawyers and the hushed whispers of the gallery. At the center of it all sat David Sterling. He wasn't just a man, he was an institution in Silicon Valley, the founder and CEO of Ether Dynamics, a company that had revolutionized data storage. David was a darling of the tech world and a fixture in society magazines. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that immense wealth and power often bestow. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, a whisper of charcoal grey that probably cost more than the court stenographer's car, and on his face a smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of supreme confidence of a game already won. Beside him, in the space legally reserved for his counsel, sat June Rossi. Her presence was the ultimate act of psychological warfare. She was 28, with hair the color of liquid night and eyes that seemed to drink in the light. Her dress was a sheath of crimson that defied the somber environment, a bold declaration of victory. She occasionally placed a perfectly manicured hand on David's arm, a gesture of ownership. She was the mistress, the home wrecker, and she wore the title like a crown. Across the aisle sat Elena Sterling. If David and June were a raging fire, Elena was a frozen lake. She sat with a posture so straight it seemed carved from ice. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant chignon. She wore a modest navy blue dress, the kind that signals quiet dignity, not surrender. There were no tears. Her face was a mask of placid neutrality. Her gaze fixed not on her husband or his lover, but on the formidable woman sitting elevated before them, Judge Eleanor Vance. To the outside world, this was a tragic but familiar story. The brilliant, aging billionaire discarding his loyal first-edition wife for a newer model. The media had already painted the picture. Elena Sterling, the former art historian who had given up a promising career to raise a family and support her husband's meteoric rise, was now being cast aside. It was a cliché, and David was counting on that. Clichés were predictable. He controlled predictable. But Elena knew something no one else in that room knew. She knew that the real story wasn't a cliché. It was a horror film, and she was the final girl. Her mind drifted back a year to the last time she had felt truly secure. It was the annual Beacon of Innovation Gala. She remembered the feel of the cool silk of her gown, the weight of the diamond necklace David had gifted her, the constellation he'd called it. He had been incandescent that night, charming everyone, his arm securely around her waist. In his speech, accepting another award, he'd called her his North Star. None of this, he'd said, sweeping his arm across the glittering ballroom, would be possible without the smartest, most beautiful and most patient woman in the world, my wife, Elena. The room had erupted in applause. She had blushed, feeling the genuine warmth of his words, or what she'd believed was warmth. Looking back now, she realized it had been performance. David was the CEO of his own life, and everyone else was just an employee playing a part. The first crack in the facade had appeared 3 months later. It was small, almost insignificant. a scent on his shirt collar when he came home late from a bored dinner. It was a perfume she didn't recognize, a heavy, musky floral, jasmine and something darker. She had asked him about it, and he'd laughed it off. Must have been Susan from marketing. You know how she practically bathes in that stuff. But a week later, a charge appeared on their joint AMX statement. La Peara 2740. He didn't buy her lingerie from La Peara. He knew she found it impractical. When she questioned him, his casual explanation was ready. A gift for my sister's birthday. Darling, forgot to tell you. His sister's birthday was 6 months away, the small cracks spider-webbed, branching out into undeniable fissures. Late nights became more frequent. Business trips extended without notice. He grew distant, his phone guarded like a state secret, its screen angled away from her whenever she entered a room. The easy intimacy they had shared for 15 years evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. He still played the part of the family man on weekends, taking their children, 12-year-old Leo and 8-year-old Chloe, to the park, but his eyes were elsewhere. He was a ghost in their sprawling Atherton mansion. Elena wasn't a fool. She had a master's degree in art history from Yale, specializing in detecting forgeries. She knew how to look for inconsistencies for the brush stroke that didn't belong for the pigment that was anachronistic. And her husband's life had become a poorly executed fake. The pain was a physical thing, a constant dull ache in her chest. This was the man she had built a life with, the father of her children. The nights were the worst, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the empty space beside her, a cold, gaping wound. She cried until she had no tears, left her grief raw and suffocating. Then one rain-swept Tuesday, grief turned to ice-cold clarity. She had been helping Chloe with the school project when an email notification flashed on the family iPad, which was still logged into David's account. The subject line was Project Night Andale Asset Realignment. The sender was Marcus Thorne, David's notoriously ruthless corporate lawyer. Curiosity warred with her sense of privacy. She clicked. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a corporate project. It was a detailed plan, a meticulously crafted strategy for divorce. It outlined the creation of offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, the transferring of marital assets into untraceable accounts, and a strategy to devalue his stock options on paper. Project Nightingale was a blueprint for how to leave his wife with the bare minimum the law would allow, protecting the vast majority of his $500 million fortune. But it was the last paragraph that made her gasp, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Phase 4. Character leverage. To ensure a favorable custody arrangement and to counter any claims of spousal support based on lifestyle, we will contest paternity of the children. This will immediately place Arsh on the defensive, portray her as untrustworthy and morally compromised, and shift the narrative in our favor. We will leak this to our media contacts at the appropriate moment. They were going to say Leo and Chloe weren't his, her children, her babies. The man she had loved, the man who had tucked their children into bed and read them stories, was planning to disown them in a court of law as a financial strategy. He was going to brand her an adulteress and bastardize his own son and daughter to save money. In that moment, something inside Elena shifted. The heartbroken wife died, and a warrior was born. The pain in her chest didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something hard and sharp rage. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness. He had mistaken her devotion for stupidity. He was about to find out how wrong he was. She closed the email, her mind racing. She took a screenshot with a trembling hand, airdropped it to her own phone, and then deleted the original email from the trash folder on the iPad. He would never know she had seen it. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the device. The tear-streaked, betrayed woman was gone. In her place was a stranger with cold, determined eyes. David had started a war. He just didn't realize she was already 2 steps ahead of him, armed with his own battle plan. and she had a weapon he could never have anticipated: the truth. The day after discovering Project Nightingale, Eleanor Sterling made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named David Chin. They had known each other since college. While Eleanor pursued art history, David had gone to Stanford Law. He was now a partner at a boutique family law firm in San Francisco, known for his sharp intellect and his quiet, bulldog tenacity. He wasn't a media hound like David's lawyer, Marcus Thorne. He was a strategist who won his cases in the discovery phase, not in the headlines. They met in a discreet coffee shop in Noe Valley, far from the prying eyes of the Silicon Valley elite. Elena laid it all out: the suspicions, the coldness, the email. She slid her phone across the table, showing him the screenshot of the battle plan. David read it, his expression hardening with each line. When he got to the part about contesting paternity, he looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "The absolute arrogance," he whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't just divorce, Elena. This is scorched earth. He's planning to psychologically annihilate you and use your children as ammunition. This document, this is malpractice. This is malicious prosecution waiting to happen." "I know," Elena said, her voice steady. "He thinks I'll crumble. He's expecting tears and hysterics. He's not expecting a fight." "So what do you want to do?" David asked, leaning forward. "We can file first. We can use this email to show intent, get a judge to freeze his assets." "No," Elena said, cutting him off. Her voice was firm. That's what he'd expect. He'd counter. He'd claim the email was a fabrication. He'd bog us down in motions for years. His lawyer is a shark. We can't meet him on his own terms. We have to let him walk into his own trap. David looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Tell me what you're thinking." "He wants to contest paternity." Elena said, a chill in her tone. "He wants to stand up in court and accuse me of being an unfaithful wife and a liar. He wants to demand a DNA test." She paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. "So, we're going to give it to him, but we're going to have the results before he even asks the question." David's eyebrows shot up. "A private DNA test. Without a court order, Eleanor, the chain of custody would be difficult to establish. He could claim we tampered with the samples. We won't use it as evidence, David." She explained her plan taking shape, even as she spoke. "We will use it as knowledge. Knowledge is power. We'll know the answer. We'll let him make his vile accusation in open court. We'll let him humiliate me. We'll let the judge order the official test. And when the results come back, his own motion will be the instrument of his destruction. He won't just be proven wrong. He'll be exposed as a malicious liar and a fraud in front of the entire world. His character, the very thing he's trying to attack, will be irrevocably destroyed by his own hand." A slow smile spread across David Chen's face. "Elena Sterling, you're more ruthless than he is." "He taught me," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "He just doesn't know what a good student I am." As the second phone call was to a discreet private investigation firm, the man she hired was a former SFPD detective named Frank Peterson, a gruff, no-nonsense man in his late 50s. She didn't need him to prove the affair. David's own sloppiness had already done that. She needed him for 2 things: to document the scale of the infidelity for the court, and to obtain the crucial DNA sample. "I need a sample of my husband's DNA," she told Frank in his cluttered, anonymous office. "A hair, a used coffee cup, anything, but it has to be obtained cleanly and he can never know." Frank nodded, unfazed. "The office is easiest. People shed DNA everywhere. We'll get it." While Frank went to work, Eleanor began her own quiet campaign. She played the part of the oblivious, slightly sad wife perfectly. She continued to manage the household, attend school functions for Leo and Chloe, and host the occasional dinner party. She smiled politely at David during the rare moments they were together, a serene mask hiding the raging fire beneath. He mistook her calm for resignation, her quietness for defeat. His arrogance was her greatest ally. Frank delivered 2 weeks later. His team had tailed David and June to a luxury hotel in Carmel for a weekend conference. He provided Elena with a folder containing dozens of high-resolution photos David and June kissing by the pool, holding hands at dinner, entering their hotel room together. It was clinical, irrefutable proof. But the most important thing he delivered was a small evidence bag. Inside was a single disposable coffee cup from Starbucks. He tossed it in a public can on his way into the office this morning. Frank said, "It's all yours." The next step was the most painful. She had to get samples from her own children. She waited until they were asleep. She crept into Leo's room first, the moonlight streaming through his window, illuminating the face of the boy who had his father's eyes. Her heart ached. This felt like a betrayal, but she knew it was a necessary shield to protect him from a far greater one. With a tiny pair of sterile scissors, she snipped a small, unnoticeable lock of his hair from the nape of his neck. She did the same to Chloe, her daughter's soft blonde hair like silk between her fingers. She sealed them in separate bags. She used a sterile cheek swab on herself, then packaged all 3 samples, the coffee cup, the 2 locks of hair, and her own swab, and sent them via a medical courier to a highly reputable DNA lab in another state, one that specialized in discreet, legally defensible testing. The order form was filed under David Chen's name, not hers. While she waited for the results, David made his move. He sat her down in their cavernous living room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on a point on the far wall. "Elena, this isn't working," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've grown apart. I think it's time we went our separate ways. I've spoken to my lawyer, and he'll be in touch with yours." Eleanor had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply nodded. "I see." Her lack of reaction seemed to annoy him. He was expecting a scene. "I'll be generous, of course," he said, the lie tasting like ash in her own mouth. "I want what's best for the children." "Of course," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of weary acceptance. He finally looked at her, a flicker of something. Was it pity or contempt in his eyes? "I'll be moving out tomorrow. I've taken a penthouse in the city. My assistant will arrange to have my things packed." "Fine," she said. He stood up, clearly unnerved by her composure. This wasn't going according to his script. He walked out of the room without another word. The next day, he was gone. 2 days later, David Chen received the official divorce filing from Marcus Thorne, and it was exactly as the email had promised. David was petitioning for sole custody, citing Elena's instability. And there on page 4 was the bombshell clause. And furthermore, the petitioner has grave reason to believe he is not the biological father of the 2 children born during the marriage, and will be motioning the court to compel a paternity test to resolve this matter. The news, when it was inevitably leaked to the press, was a Category 5 hurricane. The headlines were brutal: tech mogul's divorce, shocker wife's secret betrayal, and sterling paternity bombshell. Who's the father? Elena became a pariah. Overnight, mothers at her children's private school would turn their backs when she approached. She was photographed by paparazzi looking haggarded on her way to the grocery store. Online, the trolls were merciless, calling her a gold digger, a liar, an adulteress who had trapped a great man. David and June, meanwhile, were photographed looking somber and united. A portrait of 2 people bravely facing a devastating betrayal. Through it all, Elena remained silent. She deactivated her social media. She instructed Leo and Chloe's school to allow no media on the premises. She became a recluse in her own home, her only contact with the outside world being David Chen. "The pressure is immense, Eleanor," he told her over the phone. "They're painting a narrative, and right now we're letting them." "Let them," Elena replied, her voice calm. "Let them build the pedestal as high as they want. It will make the fall that much more spectacular." The day before the first court hearing, a secure, encrypted email arrived from the DNA lab. David Chen opened it in his office with Elena on a video call. It was a simple PDF document, a series of charts and numbers, but at the bottom was a summary. Match probability. David Sterling and Leo Sterling, 99.99998%. Match probability. David Sterling and Chloe Sterling, 99.99999%. Elena closed her eyes, a single hot tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of vindication. "We have it," David said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "The silver bullet." "Good," Elena said, opening her eyes. They were clear and cold as a winter sky. Now, we just let him load the gun and point it at his own head. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare orchestrated by David and his attorney Marcus Thorne. Thorne, a man with a reptilian smile and a reputation for salting the earth of his legal adversaries, launched a full-scale media assault. Carefully selected sources close to the couple began leaking stories to gossip columns and tech blogs. One story suggested Elena had been having a long-term affair with a bohemian art dealer from her past. Another hinted at her erratic behavior and lavish, irresponsible spending. They were building a case in the court of public opinion, meticulously crafting an image of Elena as an unstable, untrustworthy woman, perfectly capable of deceiving her husband for 15 years. The narrative was simple and effective. David Sterling, the brilliant visionary, had been the victim of the ultimate betrayal. Elena weathered the storm from within the walls of the Atherton mansion. She felt like a prisoner, the whispers and headlines forming invisible bars around her. The hardest part was shielding the children. Leo, at 12, was old enough to sense the tension. He saw the paparazzi lurking at the end of their long driveway and asked questions Eleanor couldn't answer. "Mom, why are those people always taking pictures? Why is Dad living somewhere else?" he'd asked one evening, his voice small. Elena had pulled him close, her heart constricting. "Daddy and I are having some grown-up disagreements, sweetie, but we both love you and Chloe more than anything in the world. That will never ever change." It was a half-truth, but it was the only one she could give. Meanwhile, David Chen was playing a very different game. While Marcus Thorne was busy talking to reporters, David was buried in paperwork, filing motion after motion for financial discovery. He requested every bank statement, every email, every contract related to David's labyrinthine corporate structure. Thorne's office responded with a deluge of paper, thousands of pages of irrelevant documents, a classic hide-the-needle-in-a-haystack tactic. But David had hired a team of forensic accountants, telling them to look for the specific shell corporations mentioned in the Project Nightingale email. Nightingale Holdings looted Blue Heron Investments Inc. and a dozen others. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone," David told Elena during one of their nightly calls. "Men like David Sterling believe rules are for other people. They get sloppy. He's moved millions, but he's left a trail. We just have to find it." The pre-trial hearing was a formality, but a crucial one. It was where David's team would formally introduce their motion to compel the paternity test. They met in Judge Vance's chambers, a room that felt more like a library lined with leather-bound legal books. David Sterling was there, exuding a somber confidence. Marcus Thorne did all the talking, his voice smooth and reasonable as he laid out their unfortunate but necessary request. "Your Honor," Thorne began, "my client did not come to this decision lightly. It is with a heavy heart that he must confront the possibility of a profound deception. For the sake of his own peace of mind and for the future well-being and clarity of the children, we believe a paternity test is the only way to move forward with the foundation of truth." Judge Vance, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, listened without expression. She looked over at David and Elena. "Mr. Chen, your response." David stood. Your Honor, my client finds this accusation to be baseless, insulting, and deeply malicious. It is a transparent attempt to harm her reputation and gain leverage in these proceedings. It is character assassination, plain and simple. Elena sat motionless, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the judge. She played her part to perfection, radiating the quiet devastation of a falsely accused woman. Thorne smirked. If the accusation is baseless, then your client should have no objection to a simple test to clear her name. Her resistance only fuels my client's concerns. It was the moment of the pivot. David had coached her for this. He paused as if considering his options. My client is not resistant to the truth, Mr. Thorne. She is disgusted by the lie. However, he turned back to the judge. To put an end to this vile and public speculation and to protect her children from further uncertainty, she will consent. Let the court order the test. Let's have the truth once and for all. David's eyes flickered with triumph. He had won. He had forced her hand. She had agreed to the very thing that would, in his mind, expose her and ruin her. He gave Elena a look of cold pity. Judge Vance nodded curtly. Very well. The court orders a medically certified DNA test for Mr. Sterling and the two minor children, Leo and Chloe Sterling. The samples will be collected by a court-appointed lab. The results will be delivered directly to this court, sealed to be opened at the next hearing. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers said in unison. The trap was now officially set, baited and sanctioned by the legal system itself. In the days that followed, the court-ordered sample collection took place. A nurse from the appointed lab came to Elena's house for the children's cheek swabs. Another met David at his downtown office. It was all very clinical and sterile. To David, it was the final nail in Elena's coffin. He was so certain of his victory, so wrapped in his narrative of her betrayal, that he never once considered the possibility that he was wrong. His ego wouldn't allow it. Behind the scenes, David's team of forensic accountants finally struck gold. They found the thread. Following the breadcrumbs from a single wire transfer, they unraveled a network of accounts stretching from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland. They found Knight Andale Holdings, just as the email had described. They documented over $150 million in marital assets, cash, stocks, property deeds that had been systematically and illegally siphoned off into these accounts in the 6 months before David filed for divorce. It was a clear-cut case of criminal fraud. But David found something else, something even more damning. As he dug into the transfers, he noticed a recurring payment. A monthly transfer of $50,000 from one of the offshore accounts to a private trust. The beneficiary of the trust, June Rossi. This wasn't just an affair. It was a financial arrangement. David wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was paying his mistress from the very marital funds he was hiding from Eleanor. This changes everything, David said, showing Elena the bank trails. She's not just the other woman. She's a paid co-conspirator. She knew about the hidden assets. She was benefiting from them. She is just as culpable as he is. Elena looked at the printouts, her expression unreadable. She thought of June's smug look, her crimson dress, her hand on David's arm in the courtroom. It wasn't love. It was a business transaction. One more thing, Elena, David said, his voice low. He slid another document across his desk. It was a background check on June Rossi. Her social media is pristine, very carefully curated, but you can't erase everything. My investigator dug deep. Look at this. He pointed to a cached wedding website from 2 years prior. It was for June Rossi and a man named Dr. Marco Vincente, a respectable cardiologist. The website was full of smiling photos, testimonials about their love, a registry. But the wedding had never happened. It had been called off just a few weeks before the date. He called it off, Elena asked. No, David said. She did. According to my investigator's source, a jilted bridesmaid. She broke it off very suddenly. Said she'd met someone who could give her the life she deserved. This was about 18 months ago. Right when Frank's PI report suggests the affair with David started, Elena finished connecting the dots. Exactly, David confirmed. She dropped a cardiologist for a billionaire, but it gets better. My investigator found Marco Vincente. He's still heartbroken and he's angry. He said June became obsessed with David Sterling after her firm was hired to do some marketing work for Ether Dynamics. He said she talked about him constantly, and he said that just before she broke off the engagement, she told him something she thought was a brilliant plan. David leaned in his voice, barely a whisper. She told her fiancé that her new man was in a dead-end marriage and that they had a plan to get him out. A plan that involved him discovering his wife had cheated on him so he could protect his assets and get custody of the kids. Marco thought she was crazy delusional. He never imagined it was real. Elena stared at David, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a conspiracy between David and his lawyer. June was in on it from the beginning. She wasn't just a passenger. She was in the driver's seat. "Can you get him to testify or sign an affidavit?" Elena asked, her voice shaking with the magnitude of this revelation. David smiled. "Dr. Vincente is a man of principle and a man of scorn. He has already signed a sworn affidavit. We have her. We have both of them. They now had a three-pronged attack. The paternity trap, the financial fraud, and the conspiracy confirmed by the mistress's own ex-fiancé. The stage was no longer just set. It was wired with explosives, and David and June were about to walk right to the center of it, smiling. The morning of the hearing arrived, draped in a thick coastal fog that seemed to muffle the entire city. Elena chose her armor carefully, the same simple navy blue dress. It was her uniform of quiet resolve. As she drove to the courthouse with David, she felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her for months had been burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. They entered courtroom 4B to a scene of barely controlled chaos. The gallery was packed. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Marcus Thorne was holding court with a few journalists speaking in low, confidential tones. And then David arrived. He walked in as if onto a movie set where he was the star. The smile was back broader and more self-assured than ever. On his arm again was June Rossi in a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves. They were a vision of power and victory. They took their seats, David nodding curtly at his lawyer, completely ignoring Elena. He didn't even glance in her direction. To him, she was already a ghost, a footnote in his triumphant new life. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Eleanor Vance swept into the room, her black robes flowing behind her. She sat her face in impassive mask and surveyed the room over her spectacles. The ambient noise died instantly. "We are here today to continue the divorce proceedings of Sterling versus Sterling." Judge Vance began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The main order of business is to unseal and announce the results of the court-ordered paternity test. Mr. Thorne, since this was your motion, I assume you are eager to proceed." "We are, Your Honor," Marcus Thorne said, rising to his feet. He shot a look of theatrical sympathy towards his client. "Mr. Sterling is prepared to face the truth, however painful." Eleanor could feel David's smug energy radiating across the aisle. He leaned forward slightly in his chair like a sprinter in the starting blocks, waiting for the gunshot that would signal his victory. June placed a reassuring hand on his back. Judge Vance picked up a large sealed manila envelope from her desk. The seal of the court-appointed laboratory was visible in crimson wax. With a small, sharp letter opener, she slid it open. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. She slid out a single sheet of paper and unfolded it. She read it to herself first, her eyes scanning the page. For a fleeting second, her expressionless facade seemed to crack. A flicker of something disgust-surprise crossed her features before being suppressed. She looked up, her gaze moving from the paper directly to David Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice like chipping ice. The court is in receipt of the official notarized DNA analysis. The entire room held its breath. David's smile was frozen on his face. According to the results, Judge Vance continued, her voice ringing with clarity. The probability of you, David Michael Sterling, being the biological father of the child, Leo James Sterling, is 99.998%. A collective gasp went through the gallery. David's smile didn't just falter, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He stared at the judge as if she'd just started speaking in a foreign language. Judge Vance wasn't finished. Furthermore, the probability of you, David Michael Sterling, being the biological father of the child, Chloe Ann Sterling, is 99.9999%. She laid the paper down flat on her desk. Let the record show that the paternity of the children is by your own motion, Mr. Sterling established beyond any scientific doubt. You are their father. The silence that followed was deafening. David swiveled his head to look at Marcus Thorne, his eyes wide with panic and fury. Thorne looked just as stunned, his mouth slightly agape. June's hand, which had been on David's back, was snatched away as if she'd touched a hot stove. Her face was a canvas of pure shock. This was it, the first detonation. But Elena and David knew it was just the prelude. Before Thorne could recover and stammer out a response, David Chen stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but caring to every corner of the room. Judge Vance turned her piercing gaze to him. "Mr. Chen, given that Mr. Sterling's central claim, a claim he and his counsel have viciously and publicly prosecuted, has now been proven to be a categorical and malicious falsehood, we have several matters to bring to the court's attention." Thorne finally found his voice. "Objection. This is not on the docket. Overruled." Judge Vance snapped, her eyes narrowing at Thorne. "You open this door, counsel. You put Ms. Sterling's character and morality on public trial based on a lie. I'm inclined to hear what Mr. Chen has to say. Proceed." David nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. For the past several months, my client has been the subject of a ruthless smear campaign, all based on the lie that was just exposed. But Mr. Sterling's deception runs far deeper than character assassination. He has also engaged in a systematic and illegal campaign to defraud my client of her rightful share of the marital estate. He walked to the clerk and handed over a thick binder. Your Honor, this is a full forensic accounting report. It details the creation of numerous offshore shell corporations with names like Nightingale Holdings and documents the illegal transfer of over $150 million of marital assets into these untraceable accounts in the 6 months prior to Mr. Sterling filing for divorce. A wave of shock rolled through the courtroom 10 times more powerful than the first. Reporters were writing so fast, their pens seemed to smoke. David looked like he had been physically struck. He was no longer a predator. He was prey caught in the glare of a spotlight, and he was starting to look around for an escape route. "This is an outrage," Thorne bellowed, but his protest lacked conviction. He looked panicked. "It is indeed an outrage, Mr. Thorne," Judge Vance said coldly, flipping through the first few pages of the binder David had given her. "It appears to be a prima facie case of felony fraud and perjury, given the financial disclosures Mr. Sterling has already submitted to this court." She looked up at David again, her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Sterling, you are in a catastrophic amount of legal trouble." But David Chen wasn't done. He held up his hand for silence. "And finally, Your Honor," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. This entire painful charade, the false accusations, the public humiliation of my client, the attempt to disown his own children, was not a spontaneous act of a misguided man. It was a premeditated conspiracy. He turned his body slightly to include not just David, but June in his line of sight. A conspiracy not just between Mr. Sterling and his legal team, but one that actively involved his mistress, Miss June Rossi. June, who had been shrinking in her seat now, looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "Objection, Your Honor! He's baselessly attacking a civilian in this courtroom," Thorne yelled. "Is it baseless, Mr. Chen?" Judge Vance asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "No, Your Honor," David replied. He produced another document. "This is a sworn and notarized affidavit from a Dr. Marco Vincente." At the mention of the name, all the blood drained from June's face. She looked at David, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. But David wasn't looking at her. He was staring at David Chen with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Dr. Vincente," David continued, "was Ms. Rosie's fiancé until she abruptly broke off their engagement 18 months ago to begin her affair with the married Mr. Sterling. In his affidavit, Dr. Vincente testifies under penalty of perjury that Ms. Rosie outlined their entire plan to him. A plan where she and Mr. Sterling would manufacture a narrative of welly infidelity, allowing Mr. Sterling to file for divorce, hide his assets, and contest paternity to gain full custody and leave his wife with nothing. She described it to her fiancé as their perfect plan. David let the words hang in the air. The second and most powerful detonation. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, but it was useless against the tide of shock and outrage. June Rossi snapped. Her carefully constructed facade of sophisticated calm crumbled into dust. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor, and pointed a trembling finger at David. You told me it would work," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "You told me she would break. You told me your lawyers had it all handled. You promised me everything." David looked at her, his face a mask of utter contempt. "Shut up, you fool," he hissed. But it was too late. Her public outburst was a confession. She had just admitted to the entire conspiracy in open court. Judge Vance slammed her gavel down 3 sharp, deafening cracks. "Silence!" she roared, her voice booming with authority. The room finally fell quiet. She pointed a finger at June. "Ms. Rosie, you will sit down, and you will not say another word, or I will have you removed and held in contempt." Then she fixed her glacial stare on David Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, your actions in this courtroom and prior to it are the most reprehensible I have seen in my 15 years on this bench. You have committed perjury, you have committed fraud, you have maliciously attempted to defraud your wife and traumatize your own children for financial gain. You have abused the justice system and made a mockery of this court." She leaned forward. "This divorce proceeding is now the least of your problems. I am referring this entire case, the financial fraud, the perjury, the conspiracy, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation." She looked at the court officer. "The evidence binders from Mr. Chen are to be sealed and delivered to the DA by end of day." She looked at Marcus Thorne and you, counsel. "You are dangerously close to being implicated in this conspiracy. I would advise you to retain your own lawyer." Finally, her gaze softened just for a moment as she looked at Elena. It was a look of profound respect. Elena met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She had not said a word. She hadn't needed to. David Sterling, the billionaire titan, the master of the universe, sat slumped in his chair, utterly broken. His smile was gone, replaced by the vacant, terrified look of a man whose world had just been utterly and completely obliterated by a truth he had been too arrogant to even consider. The aftermath of the courtroom detonation was swift and brutal. The story wasn't just news, it was a global phenomenon. Billionaire's divorce plot implodes. Fraud, perjury, and a fake paternity scandal screamed the headlines. The narrative David and Thorne had so carefully constructed was shattered, and the shrapnel tore their reputations to shreds. David Sterling was arrested 2 days later. The image of the titan of industry in handcuffs, his face pale and haggarded, being led into a police car, became the defining photo of his downfall. The board of Ether Dynamics convened an emergency meeting and summarily fired him as CEO, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable personal conduct. The company's stock plunged over 40%, wiping out billions in value. The God King of Silicon Valley had been dethroned. Marcus Thorne, facing disbarment and a potential indictment as a co-conspirator, immediately cut a deal with the district attorney's office, agreeing to testify against his former client in exchange for immunity. June Rossi vanished. Fired from her job and facing her own legal jeopardy, she became a ghost. Her social media was scrubbed, her apartment emptied. The crimson and cream dresses were replaced by the harsh glare of public infamy. The life she had conspired to steal had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. For Elena, the victory was quiet, but total. With David's assets unfrozen and his fraud laid bare, the divorce settlement was swift and staggering. She was awarded 60% of the marital estate, a sum that amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. She received full legal and physical custody of Leo and Chloe, with David's visitation rights to be supervised and contingent on extensive psychological evaluation. She also won ownership of the Atherton mansion, but Elena didn't want the mansion. It was a gilded cage filled with the ghosts of lies. The first thing she did was put it on the market. 6 months later, the dust had begun to settle. The world had moved on to its next scandal, and the name David Sterling was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He was out on bail, awaiting a criminal trial that he was almost certain to lose. Eleanor and her children were living in a beautiful, light-filled home in Moraine County, across the Golden Gate Bridge from the city. It was smaller than the Atherton estate, but it felt infinitely larger. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a sprawling garden where Chloe was planting sunflowers and a music room where Leo was learning to play the guitar. The paparazzi were gone. The whispers had faded. Their lives were blessedly, wonderfully normal. Eleanor had rediscovered the woman she was before she became Mrs. David Sterling. She had started a small private art consultancy firm advising collectors and authenticating pieces. The very skills she had used to deconstruct her husband's web of lies. She found joy in the work, in using her mind and her passion again. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was sitting on her back porch, a cup of tea, warming her hands, watching her children play on the lawn. They were laughing, a sound that was pure and unburdened. Leo looked up and caught her eye, giving her a wide, easy smile. It was a genuine smile full of love and security. It was everything David's smile had never been. David Chen came to visit, bringing paperwork to sign. They sat on the porch together, a comfortable silence between them. "You know," David said, looking out at the yard, "I've handled hundreds of divorce cases. Most of them end with bitterness and scorched earth. I've never seen one end with this." "With what?" Eleanor asked. "With peace," he said. "He set out to destroy you, Eleanor. Instead, you found yourself." Elena considered his words. He was right. In the fire of David's betrayal, she had been forged into someone stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely protective of her own happiness than she had ever known she could be. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted, but she had gained herself in a future that was entirely her own. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of salt from the bay and the sound of her children's laughter. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly free. The war was over, and she had won. Not by fighting with his weapons of cruelty and deceit, but with her own intelligence, patience, and the undeniable power of the truth. Elena's story is a powerful real-life reminder that the truth is the one weapon that never fails. It shows that integrity and strength are not about how loudly you can shout, but how patiently you can plan, and how bravely you can stand in your own conviction, even when the world is against you. David Sterling walked into that courtroom believing his money and power made him invincible. He forgot that the most powerful forces on earth, a mother's love and the simple, elegant truth, cannot be bought, bullied, or beaten. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength comes in many forms and the truth will always come to light. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of deception, survival, and ultimate triumph. What part of Elena's strategy impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.
The courthouse air was thin and sharp, each breath a reminder of the freedom Maya was trying to grasp. But Mark stood in her way, a smiling predator caging her against the cold stone wall. His voice, a venomous whisper meant only for her, twisted their history into a weapon. "You can't do this without me, Maya. You're nothing." Her eyes, wide with panic, scanned the indifferent crowd. Then she saw him, a man in a simple dark coat, his profile turned away from her nightmare. In that desperate, heart-stopping moment, a reckless plan ignited. It was a gamble that would either save her or shatter her completely. The granite steps of the courthouse felt like a cliff edge, and Maya Reynolds was being backed toward it. Mark Vance, the man who had once promised her the world, was now systematically dismantling hers. He hadn't raised his voice. He never did in public. Instead, he leaned in, his cologne a suffocating memory, and smiled a smile that never reached his cold, blue eyes. "You're being hysterical," he murmured, the words a familiar brand on her psyche. "A custody hearing? Don't be dramatic. This is our baby, our family, our." The word was a cage. For months, it had been his justification for tracking her calls, questioning her friendships, and slowly, expertly isolating her until his world was the only one she knew. The pregnancy, which should have been a shared joy, had become his ultimate anchor, the final lock on the door. Her hand rested instinctively over the slight swell of her stomach. "It's my baby, Mark, and I'm doing this for them." Her voice was a fragile thread in the city wind. "You can't afford a crib, let alone a lawyer," he scoffed, his charm a glittering, dangerous thing. "Don't worry, I'll take care of you. I'll always take care of you. You just need to come home." Home! The pristine apartment that felt like a showroom, where her opinions faded into the off-white walls. The place where she had finally realized that his care was just another word for control. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She had to get away, not just for a moment, but for good. Her gaze darted past his shoulder, searching for any exit, any distraction. And then she saw him. He was standing apart from the courthouse chaos, a small island of stillness. He wasn't handsome in the polished, predatory way Mark was. His features were quiet, his dark hair slightly disheveled by the wind. He was wearing a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal coat, his hands tucked into his pockets as he looked up at the stoic architecture. There was an air of solitude about him, a self-contained quiet that felt like a different universe from the noise in her head. He was a stranger, a nobody, and in that moment, he was her only hope. The thought was insane, a product of pure adrenaline-fueled desperation. Show Mark you've moved on. Show him he has no power. The idea was a spark, and before she could extinguish it, it had already caught fire. Her feet moved before her mind could protest. She walked past Mark, ignoring the sharp, questioning tone of his voice as he called her name. The world seemed to slow, the sounds of the city muffling into a dull roar. Her entire focus narrowed to the man in the charcoal coat. She reached him and didn't hesitate. Wrapping her arms around him from behind, she pressed her face into the cool, smooth fabric of his coat. It smelled faintly of clean linen and cold air. For a split second, he went utterly rigid, a statue of surprise. "Just play along," she whispered, her voice trembling against his back. "Please, I'm in trouble." A lifetime seemed to pass in that silence. She could feel Mark's eyes on them, a burning, possessive glare. She was sure the stranger would shove her away, call for security, expose her pathetic, reckless lie. But he didn't. Slowly, as if moving through water, his hand came out of his pocket. He didn't turn. He didn't speak. He simply laid his hand over hers where it rested on his chest. It was a gesture of quiet solidarity. Then he shifted slightly, turning his body just enough to shield her from Mark's view, and his other arm came around her waist, holding her in a loose, protective embrace. It wasn't intimate, but it was a fortress. From over the stranger's shoulder, Maya saw Mark's face. The confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. then a flash of raw, possessive fury. He saw another man's arm around what he considered his. The sight threw him completely off balance. He looked from Maya to the stranger, his mind racing, trying to recalibrate. Who was this man? When had this happened? His control was slipping. Without another word, Mark turned on his heel and strode away, disappearing into the flow of the city. The venom was gone, for now. The moment he was out of sight, the strength drained from Maya's legs. She pulled away from the stranger, stumbling back a step. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her face burning with shame. I didn't know what else to do. He wouldn't leave me alone. Thank you. I'm so sorry." The man finally turned to face her fully. His eyes were a deep, startlingly intelligent gray. They weren't angry or annoyed. They were assessing. He looked at her, then glanced in the direction Mark had gone, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. He took in her trembling hands, the protective way she stood, the exhaustion etched onto her face. He didn't offer platitudes or ask invasive questions. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a slim, ridiculously plain business card. It was made of heavy cream-colored stock, with nothing but a name and a number elegantly embossed in black ink. Adrian Thorne. "If you find yourself in trouble again," he said, his voice deeper and quieter than she'd expected, "call this number." He pressed the card into her palm, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. And then, with a final, lingering look, he turned and walked away, melting into the crowd as if he were never there, leaving Maya standing alone on the cliff edge, clutching a stranger's name. Maya's apartment was less a home and more a holding cell for her anxieties. It was a cramped third-floor walk-up that always smelled faintly of her downstairs neighbor's cooking and her own lingering fear. The business card sat on her small, cluttered kitchen table, looking alien and imposing against the worn-out wood. Adrian Thorne. The name felt heavy, like a secret she didn't know how to keep. "You did what?" Izzy, Garcia's voice crackled through the phone, a mixture of awe and terror. "Maya, are you insane? You hugged a random man. He could have been anyone. A murderer. A weirdo." "He wasn't a weirdo, Izzy," Maya said, tracing the embossed letters with her fingertip. "He was calm. He helped me. He helped you by not having you arrested for assault. What if Mark had called your bluff? What if he'd started a fight?" "He didn't," Maya whispered. "He just left. For the first time in weeks, he just walked away." A heavy silence followed. Izzy knew better than anyone what Maya had been enduring. She'd been the one to help Maya pack her life into 2 suitcases while Mark was on a business trip. The one who'd screened the dozens of placating, then pleading, then threatening calls. "Okay," Izzy said, her tone softening. "Okay, so the crazy gambit worked. For today. But what about this guy, Adrian Thorne? Did you Google him?" "First thing I did, Maya admitted. There's nothing. A few business registries with that name, but no pictures, no social media. It's like he doesn't exist." "That's not calm, honey. That's creepy." Her phone buzzed on the table. A new text message. From Mark. "I know you're trying to hurt me, Maya. Bringing some stranger into our lives. Did you think I wouldn't find out about him? I'm going to fight for my child. You won't take my family from me." The blood drained from her face. His child. His family. The possessive pronouns were daggers. He was already spinning the narrative, painting himself as the victim. She knew what came next. He would use his family's money and influence to bury her in legal fees, to paint her as an unstable, unfit mother. He had the resources. She had a part-time graphic design job that barely covered her rent. "He just texted me," she said, her voice shaking. "He's threatening to fight for custody." "He's bluffing," Izzy said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is he?" Maya stared at the cream-colored card. It was a lifeline or an anchor, and she couldn't tell which. But the fear of Mark was a roaring fire at her back, and Adrian Thorne was the only door in sight. With a trembling hand, she ended the call with Izzy and dialed the number. It rang only twice. "Hello?" The voice was calm, professional, and definitely not Adrian's. It belonged to an older man. Hello," Maya stammered. "My name is Maya Reynolds. I was given this number by Mr. Thorne." "Ah, Ms. Reynolds." "Yes, we were expecting your call," the man said smoothly. "Mr. Thorne has asked me to extend an invitation to you. He would like to meet to discuss your situation. Would you be available to meet at the Daily Grind coffee shop on Elm Street in 1 hour? It was a neutral location, public and unassuming. It wasn't an invitation to a private office or a secluded mansion. It was a coffee shop. Still, her guard was up. How did he know I would call? Mr. Thorne is a good judge of character, the man replied, his tone polite but firm, and of desperation. 1 hour? She felt a flash of anger at the word. Desperation, but he wasn't wrong. Yes, she said, her voice small. I'll be there. The Daily Grind was quiet, filled with the scent of roasted coffee and the low hum of conversation. Adrian Thorne was already there, seated at a small table in the corner, a simple black coffee untouched before him. He wore a gray Henley, and without the formal coat, he looked younger, less imposing, but no less intense. Maya slid into the chair opposite him, her hands clenched in her lap. Mr. Thorne, Adrian, he corrected her quietly, his gray eyes meeting hers. Thank you for coming. The silence that followed was heavy. He didn't push her to talk or offer empty reassurances. He just watched her, his gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. He seemed to see everything, the frayed cuff of her sleeve, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hand hovered near her belly. I want to apologize again for yesterday, she finally said, needing to fill the void. It was inappropriate and reckless. You didn't have to help me. His name is Mark Vance, Adrian stated, not as a question. You were together for 2 years. You're 3 months pregnant. He has a history of coercive control, and his family has considerable financial means, which he plans to use to take your child from you. Maya stared at him, her heart turning to ice. How do you know that? I believe in being prepared, he said simply, taking a slow sip of his coffee. My security consultant, Mr. Henderson, the man you spoke to on the phone, is very thorough. I don't involve myself in situations I don't understand. She felt violated, exposed. He had looked into her life, peeled back the layers of her privacy. This felt like Mark all over again, another man digging into her business, assuming he had the right. So you had me investigated. I had your ex investigated, he corrected her, his tone even, to assess the nature of the threat. The only thing I needed to know about you, I saw yesterday outside the courthouse. You're a fighter, but you're fighting a battle you're not equipped to win on your own. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. Which is why I'd like to make you an offer. I have a guest suite in my home. It's secure, private. You would be safe there. I will also retain a legal team on your behalf. The best family law attorneys in the city. They will handle Mark. All of it will be taken care of. There will be no cost to you. Maya's mind reeled. A safe house? Lawyers? The offer was so outlandish, so impossibly generous, that her suspicion immediately skyrocketed. Her experiences had taught her that nothing was free. Everything had a price, especially kindness from powerful men. Why? She asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. Why would you do any of this? You don't know me. That's true, I don't, he admitted. But I know men like Mark Vance. I know the kind of suffocating power they wield. I have a profound dislike for bullies. His eyes darkened for a fraction of a second, a glimpse of some old, deep-seated anger. Consider it a personal investment in seeing the right side win. No strings attached? She didn't believe it. This had to be a trap, a different kind of gilded cage. She would be trading one man's control for another's. I can't accept, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, but no. Adrian Thorne didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, as if expecting her refusal. He finished his coffee and stood up. The offer stands, he said. Mr. Henderson's number is on the card. If you change your mind, he will handle the arrangements. Be safe, Maya. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her alone at the table, the scent of coffee suddenly feeling as suffocating as Mark's cologne. She was more confused and more terrified than ever. The next 2 days were a slow-motion nightmare. Maya tried to convince herself she had made the right decision, that independence, however precarious, was better than indebted servitude to a mysterious stranger. She threw herself into her freelance work, designing logos for a local bakery, the meticulous kerning of letters a welcome distraction from the chaos in her mind. But the peace was a fragile veneer. Mark's texts became more frequent, a digital water torture. They swung wildly from declarations of undying love to accusations of betrayal. Then the escalation she had been dreading arrived not as a text, but in person. She was walking home from the grocery store, her arms aching from the weight of the bags, when his silver sedan pulled up beside her. He got out, his face a mask of wounded charm. "Maya, baby, just talk to me," he said, blocking her path on the sidewalk. "Mark, please, leave me alone," she pleaded, clutching her groceries like a shield. A few passers-by glanced over, their curiosity piqued. "Who is he?" Mark pressed, his voice dropping. "I saw the way he held you. Have you been seeing him behind my back this whole time? Is that why you left?" "There's no one," she insisted, her voice rising with panic. "Just let me go home." "This isn't over," he hissed, the charm finally cracking to reveal the ugly obsession beneath. "I will not be discarded." He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical force, pinning her with its intensity. He got back in his car and sped off, leaving her trembling in the middle of the sidewalk, the stares of strangers burning into her skin. The final straw came the next morning. Her boss, a kindly woman named Mrs. Gable, called her into her small office at the back of the print shop where Maya worked part-time. Her face was etched with worry. "Maya, a man was in here this morning," she began, wringing her hands. "Mark Vance. He was asking about your schedule, about your well-being. He said he was your fiancé and was worried about you." Maya's stomach plummeted. "He's not my fiancé, he's my ex." "That's what I gathered," Mrs. Gable said gently. "He was very insistent. It made some of the other staff uncomfortable. Maya, I like you, and you do good work, but I can't have this kind of drama at my business. You need to sort this out. This is your final warning." A final warning. The words echoed in her ears. He was systematically destroying every pillar of her fragile independence, her peace of mind, her public reputation, and now her job. She was being erased. That afternoon, sitting in her silent apartment, the city noises feeling miles away, she took out the cream-colored card. Her hands were surprisingly steady as she dialed the number. "Henderson, it's Maya Reynolds," she said, her voice flat. "I've changed my mind." The arrangements were made with terrifying efficiency. There was no grand scene, no dramatic escape. An hour later, a nondescript black car was waiting at the end of her street. Mr. Henderson, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a ramrod-straight posture, met her at the door and carried her 2 suitcases as if they weighed nothing. He said little, but his presence was a blanket of calm. They drove not to a mansion in the suburbs, but to a sleek, modern high-rise downtown that scraped the clouds. A private elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The first thing that struck Maya was the silence. It was a deep, profound quiet that the city below couldn't penetrate. The second was the space. The apartment was a study in minimalist luxury, polished concrete floors, vast floor-to-ceiling windows with a godlike view of the skyline, and sparse, elegant furniture that looked more like art than something a person would actually sit on. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly soulless. "Mr. Thorne is currently in his office," Mr. Henderson explained, leading her down a long hall. "This will be your suite." The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment. It had its own bathroom, a sitting area, and a bedroom with a wall of windows overlooking the city. Everything was in shades of white, gray, and black. It felt like a 5-star hotel room, luxurious and completely impersonal. "There is a fully stocked kitchen. Help yourself to whatever you need," Mr. Henderson continued. "Mr. Thorne has already engaged the law firm of Sterling & Associates. They will be in touch tomorrow. Is there anything else you require?" "No," she said, feeling dazed. "Thank you." He gave a slight bow and retreated, his footsteps silent on the concrete floor, leaving Maya alone in her new gilded cage. For the first few days, she barely saw Adrian. She'd wake up and find a tray with a simple, healthy breakfast left on the kitchen island. In the evenings, a similar dinner would appear. They were ghosts in the same vast space. The one time they passed in the hallway, the encounter was excruciatingly awkward. He nodded. She mumbled a "hello," and they both scurried away to their separate wings. His kindness was disorienting because it was so detached. On the third day, a brand new top-of-the-line laptop and graphics tablet were sitting on the desk in her room. No note, no explanation. It was a silent, anonymous gift. She was grateful, of course, but also deeply unsettled. She felt like a stray cat he'd taken in, fed and sheltered but kept at a careful distance. A project, an exercise in philanthropy. The power imbalance was a chasm between them. She was living in his home, eating his food, using his lawyer, and soon his computer. He held all the cards. Her mind, conditioned by her time with Mark, kept searching for the catch, the inevitable price she would have to pay. To keep from going mad with anxiety, she opened the new laptop. She installed the design software and pulled up the portfolio she had abandoned months ago. As she began to work, sketching out a new logo concept, she felt a tiny, familiar flicker of herself return. In the clean lines and balanced colors, she could create order out of chaos. It was a small act of defiance, a way of insisting on her own identity in this sterile, silent palace. She was not just a victim or a project. She was a designer. She was Maya, and she would hold on to that no matter what cage she found herself in. The phone call with the lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Sterling, left Maya feeling raw and exposed. The process of building a case required her to excavate her relationship with Mark, piece by painful piece. She had to forward his threatening texts, recount the times he'd shown up uninvited, and describe in clinical detail the suffocating fear that had become her constant companion. Each memory she shared felt like giving away a part of herself, leaving her hollowed out. She ended the call and sank onto the plush sofa in her suite, wrapping her arms around her stomach. The baby was a comforting, solid presence, a silent witness to her turmoil. She closed her eyes, fighting back the wave of exhaustion and despair. This was for the best, she told herself. This was the only way. I thought you might be hungry. Her eyes snapped open. Adrian was standing in the doorway, holding a tray with 2 plates and 2 glasses of water. He was hesitant, as if unsure of his right to enter the space he was letting her use. I'm not really, she started to say. Just try a little, he said, his voice gentle. He set the tray down on the coffee table. It was a simple meal, grilled chicken, roasted asparagus, and quinoa, food he had clearly made himself. I overheard some of the call. It sounded difficult. She flinched, the feeling of being monitored returning. He seemed to notice her reaction immediately. The walls are not as thick as they look, he said, a faint hint of apology in his tone. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. He sat down in the armchair opposite her, creating a respectful distance between them. I can go if you'd rather be alone. No, she found herself saying, surprised by her own voice. It's okay. Stay. The silence that fell was different this time. It wasn't awkward. It was companionable. They ate without speaking for a few minutes, the city lights beginning to glitter in the vast windows as dusk fell. So, she said, pushing a piece of asparagus around her plate, you're a man of mystery. What is it you actually do? He seemed to consider the question seriously. I build things, mostly with code, like websites, apps, something like that, he said a little vaguely. I run a small tech company. We create software solutions, mostly for accessibility. It wasn't the answer she was expecting. She had pictured some soulless corporate titan, a Wall Street shark. Not this. Accessibility for who? For people with disabilities, communication aids, navigation tools, things that help level the playing field. He looked down at his plate, a flicker of something personal in his eyes. My mother had MS. I grew up watching the world become smaller for her every day. I wanted to build things that would make it bigger again. The confession hung in the air between them, simple, honest, and deeply revealing. This man who lived in a sterile, isolated penthouse was spending his life trying to connect people to the world. And you? He asked, shifting the focus back to her. Ms. Sterling mentioned you're a graphic designer. Maya felt a blush creep up her neck. I'm trying to be. I do freelance work mostly. Logos, branding. I'm not, established. Could I see some of your work sometime? He asked. There was no condescension in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Sure, she said, a small tentative smile touching her lips. They finished their meal, the conversation drifting easily from design principles to the ridiculousness of modern architecture. For the first time, she felt like a person in his eyes, not a problem to be solved. As he gathered the plates, he paused. You know, he said, his voice low, men like Mark, they feed on fear. But what they truly can't stand is indifference. When they finally realize they have no effect on you, that their existence is irrelevant to your happiness, that's when their power evaporates. The words were spoken with a quiet, chilling certainty. You sound like you speak from experience, she said softly. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't like people who think they own others, he said, and the venom in his voice was so sharp it startled her. It was a brief, shocking glimpse of a deep, old wound. He had his own ghosts. His motive for helping her wasn't just a dislike of bullies. It was personal, intensely personal. He carried the tray out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The gilded cage was starting to feel different. The silence was no longer empty, but peaceful. She looked around the suite, at the elegant, impersonal furniture, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt safe. She was beginning to see the man behind the formidable walls he had built around himself. She saw the cracks in his armor, and through them, a flicker of loneliness that looked startlingly familiar. It looked a lot like her own. The first legal notice sent Mark into a spiral. His texts, which Ms. Sterling had instructed Maya to save but not respond to, became a torrent of rage and desperation. When that failed to provoke a response, he found a new, more public weapon. It was Izzy who saw it first. She sent Maya a link with a one-word message: shit. The link led to a sleazy online gossip blog. The headline screamed across the top of the page: Tech recluse Adrian Thorne trapped by pregnant gold digger. Maya's blood ran cold. The article was a masterpiece of malicious fiction, skillfully weaving threads of truth with outright lies. It painted her as a conniving opportunist who had faked a chance encounter to ensnare the notoriously private billionaire. It mentioned her financial struggles, twisting her desperation into calculated greed. And then came the final, gut-wrenching blow. Embedded in the article was a photo, an intimate selfie she had sent Mark months ago, in a moment of love and trust. In it, she was smiling, happy, and completely unaware of how it would one day be used to humiliate her. The screen blurred through her tears. He had taken something beautiful and private and twisted it into something ugly for the whole world to see. Her privacy, her reputation, shattered. This was worse than any shouted threat. This was a public execution. She stumbled out of her room, her mind racing. This was it, the end of the arrangement. Adrian Thorne's entire life was built around privacy. She was a liability, a walking, talking scandal that had just blown his carefully constructed world wide open. He would have no choice but to throw her out. She had to leave before he could. She was frantically pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them into her suitcase, when he appeared in the doorway. His face was a thundercloud. She braced herself for the explosion, for the cold, quiet dismissal. "I was just packing," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'll be gone in 10 minutes. I am so sorry, Adrian. I never wanted to bring this into your life." He walked into the room, took the sweater from her trembling hands and gently placed it back on the bed. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice a low growl. "But the article, your privacy, this is a nightmare for you," she choked out. "It is," he agreed, his gray eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. "But my anger is not directed at you, Maya. It's directed at him." He paced the room, a caged tiger, his usual stillness completely gone. "This is what they do. This is the playbook. When they can't control you, they try to destroy you. They isolate you, turn people against you, and make you think you're the one who's crazy." He stopped and looked at her, his expression raw with a pain that was clearly not just about her situation. "5 years ago," he began, his voice strained, "I had a business partner. We built my company from the ground up, in my garage. We were more than partners. I thought we were friends. I loved her." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "She decided my half of the company wasn't enough. She wanted all of it. So she sold our proprietary code to a competitor, and when I confronted her, she went to the press. She fabricated a story about me being an unstable, abusive megalomaniac. She used private emails, twisted conversations, anything she could to ruin me. It nearly worked. The board tried to oust me, our stock plummeted. My private life, my reputation, it was all just ammunition for her." He finally stood still, the storm inside him settling into a cold, hard resolve. "I fought back, I cleared my name, but I learned a valuable lesson. Some people will burn down everything you've ever built just to feel the warmth of the flames. That's why I disappeared. I decided I would never give anyone that kind of power over me again." He looked at Maya, and for the first time she understood everything. His reclusiveness, his caution, his deep-seated hatred of bullies. He wasn't just helping her. He was fighting his own ghost. He saw his own betrayal, his own public humiliation, mirrored in her eyes. The chasm of power and wealth between them vanished, replaced by a bridge of shared experience. They were two survivors of the same kind of war. "I'm not going to let him do this to you," Adrian said, his voice now quiet but filled with unshakable conviction. "This isn't your mess to clean up alone anymore. It's ours." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment, before he gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "So, unpack your bag, Maya. We have a fight to win." The public scandal, meant to isolate and destroy Maya, had the opposite effect. It fused her and Adrian into a formidable team. The penthouse, once a silent, cavernous space, became their war room. Ms. Sterling and a PR specialist joined them for strategy sessions around the massive kitchen island, the air crackling with legal jargon and damage control tactics. Adrian, it turned out, was a brilliant strategist. He was methodical, calm, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting his own. He and his team systematically dismantled the blog post, hitting the publication with a defamation lawsuit so swift and severe that the article was pulled within 24 hours. They worked with Mrs. Sterling to file a restraining order against Mark, using his public stunt as Exhibit A in a pattern of harassment. Through it all, Maya was no longer a passive recipient of aid. She was an active participant. She provided context, explained the subtleties of Mark's manipulation, and gave her lawyers the emotional ammunition they needed. The act of fighting back, of taking control, was a powerful antidote to her fear. Her voice, once fragile, grew stronger with every strategy session. The atmosphere between her and Adrian shifted. The stilted silences were replaced by a comfortable quiet, the easy companionship of two people working toward a common goal. They fell into a domestic rhythm. He'd make coffee while she reviewed legal documents. She'd find a new design client, and he'd offer quiet, insightful feedback on her work, his eye for structure and detail proving surprisingly helpful. Their conversations deepened, venturing into the quiet corners of their lives. He showed her the passion project that occupied his nights, the accessibility app he was coding himself. He spoke about his late mother with a gentle reverence, his memories painting a portrait of a strong, resilient woman. In turn, Maya found herself opening up about her dreams, the kind of vibrant, creative life she wanted to build for herself and her baby. A life that had felt impossible just weeks ago. He didn't see her as a victim anymore. He saw her as a resilient artist, a future mother, a woman of quiet strength. One evening, they were sitting in the living room, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. She was telling him about a particularly absurd logo request from a client, and he was laughing, a genuine, unguarded sound that made her heart flutter. As she laughed with him, she felt it, a distinct, fluttering movement in her belly. A little kick. She stopped mid-sentence, her breath catching. Her hand flew to the spot. "Oh," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is it? Are you okay?" Adrian asked, his smile fading into a look of concern. "The baby," she breathed. "The baby just kicked." Another little flutter, stronger this time. Without thinking, propelled by the sheer, overwhelming magic of the moment, she reached for his hand. "Here," she said softly. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. He froze, his entire body going still. His hand was large and warm against her skin, even through the fabric of her shirt. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then a tiny, decisive tap, tap, tap right against his palm. Adrian's eyes widened. A slow, incredulous, and utterly beautiful smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated wonder. A smile that reached deep into his gray eyes and lit them up from within. He didn't say a word. He just looked from her stomach to her face, his expression one of awe. In that silent, shared moment, everything fell away. The legal battles, the gossip blogs, the ugly past. There was no billionaire, no victim. There were just two people, their hands connected over the promise of a new life, a tiny, hopeful flutter against a backdrop of a cold, unforgiving city. It was more intimate than a kiss, more profound than any declaration. It was the moment a partnership born of desperation and strategy began to feel undeniably like hope. And maybe, just maybe, something a little like love. The mediation was held in a sterile conference room with bland corporate art and a view of a brick wall. It was a deliberately soulless space designed to strip away emotion and focus on facts. Mark was already there, sitting beside his lawyer, looking smaller and less impressive under the fluorescent lights. The charming veneer had cracked, revealing the petulant, entitled man beneath. Maya walked in with Miss Sterling, her head held high. Adrian followed a few steps behind, a silent, imposing presence. He didn't sit at the main table but took a chair against the wall, his message clear. He was here for support, but this was Maya's stage. Mark's eyes locked on Maya, ignoring everyone else. "So you brought your bodyguard," he sneered, nodding his head toward Adrian. "He's not my bodyguard, Mark," Maya said, her voice calm and even. The woman who would have crumbled under that sneer a month ago was gone. "He's my friend." The mediation began. Mark's lawyer tried to argue for shared custody, painting Mark as a loving, concerned father-to-be who had been cruelly shut out. But Ms. Sterling was a shark. She calmly laid out the evidence. The log of harassing text messages, the witness statement from Maya's boss, the now infamous blog post, and the freshly granted restraining order. Mark's composure began to fray. "She's lying," he burst out, pointing a finger at Maya. "She's turning you all against me. We were happy. Ask her about the photo she sent me. Does that look like an unhappy woman?" He was trying to get under her skin, to use their shared intimacy as a weapon, to make her feel the old shame. But as Maya looked at him, she didn't feel shame. She felt a profound, aching pity. He was a hollow man, his only power derived from controlling others. She met his gaze directly. "We were not happy, Mark. I was afraid. The woman in that photo trusted you. She loved you, and you used that trust to try and destroy her. But you didn't succeed." She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded calmly on the table. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about me, and it's about my child. My child will be raised in a home filled with peace, stability, and respect. They will not be used as a pawn in your games. They will not be a witness to your control." Her voice didn't waver. It was clear, strong, and final. She was no longer his victim reacting to his abuse. She was the author of her own story, and she was writing him out of it. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was an exorcism. She was reclaiming her narrative, her past, and her future, all in one breath. Adrian watched from the corner, his face impassive, but she could feel his support like a physical warmth at her back. He wasn't her savior, swooping in to fight her battles. He was her ally, the one who had given her the safety and space to find her own sword. Defeated, Mark slumped in his chair. He had no more moves to make. His power had evaporated under the harsh, fluorescent lights of reality. His lawyer, seeing the case was lost, quickly moved to negotiate. An hour later, it was over. Mark signed an agreement relinquishing all parental rights and agreeing to a permanent gag order. In exchange, Maya and Adrian would drop the defamation suit. He was stripped of his power, his connection to her, and the baby severed completely. As they walked out of the conference room and into the bright afternoon sun, Maya took a deep breath. It was the first breath of clean, untainted air she had taken in years. She had faced her demon and won. Not with money or power, but with the quiet, unshakable strength she had finally rediscovered within herself. She was free. The legal victory left a strange quiet in its wake. The constant threat that had hovered over Maya for so long was gone, and in its absence, a new, more complicated question emerged. The arrangement was over. The battle was won. What now? The penthouse, which had become a sanctuary, now felt temporary, like a hotel she had overstayed in. The realization landed with a heavy thud in her chest. She had no reason to be here anymore. The old insecurities, the fear of being a burden, crept back in. She found Adrian on the terrace, staring out at the vast cityscape. He seemed lost in thought, his quiet energy more introspective than usual. "Adrian," she said softly, stepping out into the cool evening air. He turned, a faint, sad smile on his face. "The quiet is deafening, isn't it?" "A little," she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. She stood beside him at the railing, the city a galaxy of lights at their feet. "I guess I should start looking for a new apartment." The words felt like stones in her mouth. The thought of leaving this place, of leaving him, was a physical ache. Adrian was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I was thinking," he said finally, his voice low, "about this apartment. Before you came here, it was just space. A place to work and to sleep. A fortress. It was safe, but it was empty." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face. "It doesn't feel empty anymore. Your design sketches are on the kitchen table. There's a half-finished puzzle in the living room. It's a home. You made it a home, Maya." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the precipice of a new, terrifying, and wonderful unknown. "I know our arrangement was about safety," he continued, his voice laced with a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "And you're safe now. You don't need me. But the truth is, I think I need you. I don't want this to be the end of our story." It wasn't a grand, sweeping declaration of love. It was something far better. It was quiet, honest, and real. It was Adrian. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of overwhelming relief and joy. She was no longer the desperate woman on the courthouse steps, running from her life. She was a mother-to-be with a burgeoning freelance business and a future she was building with her own two hands. She didn't need him to save her, which meant she was free to simply want him. "I don't want it to be the end either," she whispered. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt like coming home. 3 months later, the penthouse was filled with a new kind of sound, the soft, contented gurgles of a newborn baby. Maya stood in the nursery, a room painted a warm, sunny yellow, gently rocking her daughter, Lily. The minimalist apartment was now softened with the clutter of new life. A baby swing in the corner of the living room, a pile of soft blankets on the sofa. The door opened softly and Adrian came in. He looked tired, his hair was a mess, but his face was alight with a deep, quiet happiness. He wasn't holding an expensive gift or a designer baby outfit. He was holding a warm bottle. He came and stood beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders as they both looked down at their daughter. Lily's tiny hand was curled around Maya's finger, her eyes fluttering in a milky dream. "She's perfect," Adrian murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Maya leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The journey had started with a desperate, reckless act of survival, but it had led her here, to this quiet, perfect moment of peace. They weren't a fairy tale. They were two broken people who had found a way to heal each other, building a family not on promises or obligations, but on the simple, profound choice to stand together in the quiet. He looked at Maya, then at the baby in her arms, and in the soft light of the nursery, their small, unlikely family was whole. From a desperate embrace born of fear to a life rebuilt on a foundation of trust, Maya and Adrian's journey proves that true strength isn't about the power you hold, but the vulnerability you're brave enough to share. Their story is a powerful reminder that the most unexpected connections can often heal the deepest wounds, and that a family is not built on obligation or circumstance, but on a conscious, daily choice to love. If their story of courage, healing, and second chances moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe for more emotional stories that feel just like real life.